A terrifying break-in results in multiple victims.
I swung the door open and found her laying there.
She was shot in the upper part of the leg.
Once we had called the room clear, we found a deceased individual.
Despite first impressions, the evidence suggests this isn't quite what it seems.
Things that were present at the scene were adding up to a home invasion.
We found a bunch of torn up pictures. There was some kind of lost love, heartache there.
Stand in my shoes here for a second. How's that look on you?
As the investigation unfolds, detectives realize their murder victim might have put his trust in the wrong person.
She had created a fraudulent email address so that she could steal money from them.
And there could be more than one victim.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes, both tied to the same female.
It was just amazing how far that she had got in this fantasy world that she was living in.
She was going to be exposed as being a fraud, and she couldn't have that happen.
At 1:26 p.m. on August 10th, 2023, police in Zanesville, Ohio receive an emergency call from a woman named Deborah Frazier.
911, where's your emergency? I think someone's in the apartment. It was unlocked, and there's stuff everywhere, and I can't find my boyfriend. Okay, Sam, I'm going to stay on the phone with you, but I need you to back out of that apartment right now. I think someone... Oh, my God! Oh, my God, I'm shot! All units have an active invasion.
As I was en route, they did give out additional information of two men.
They were wearing hoodies and masks. One had gloves, she said.
Within minutes, police arrive at Deborah's address.
I started scanning the area. Every car that I was passing, didn't see anybody matching that description leaving the area.
I began knocking on the door. Once I did, I heard a female moaning, and I continued pounding on the door, identifying myself as the police. I heard her voice say she was not able to open the door. I checked it. It was unlocked, so I swung the door open. And then I found her laying there.
She was holding her left leg. It was apparent she had a bullet hole through her jeans.
She was shot in the upper part of the leg, thigh area. You know, you get shot in the right place, you could bleed to death. So we're tending to her.
I saw a revolver laying on the floor a few feet away from her. What I assumed was the assailant's firearm or hers, but we knew she wasn't a threat.
At that point, other officers were on scene and paramedics had showed up. She was placed on a gurney and moved to the hospital as quick as we can.
Police quickly search the two-bedroom apartment to make sure the assailants are gone.
When we got to the back bedroom, it was dark. As I entered, I saw the closet. One of the closet doors was open. A lot of people hide in closets and showers over my career, so I kind of put my attention on that. I noticed a form laying on the floor. It looked like a human under blankets. Pulled the blankets back, and at that time we found a deceased individual.
He was wrapped in black trash bags, black duct tape, a blanket, and there was some blood on the carpet.
Officers' immediate priorities are to secure the crime scene and assist their surviving victim.
I was coming down the hallway, and the paramedics were still attending to Deborah on the floor. Our Detective Bureau Sergeant Phil Michael was there, and one of our evidence technicians, Detective Moore. I said, "Hey, we have a dead body in the bedroom." Deborah, she overheard that and asked, Who's back there?
We weren't going to volunteer any information that witnesses might not know. We want to hear what their story is first.
They loaded her up on a gurney And at this point, I'm still trying to collect information. I asked her if she lives there with anybody, and she advised that she does. Her boyfriend, Tom, she was frantic. She had a gunshot wound to her leg. So getting a whole lot of information out of her, it was hard to do, but I was able to get enough to know that Tom lived there, and she hadn't been there in a couple of days.
And we learned Deborah, she was 35, Tom was in his mid-60s. There was quite a considerable age gap between the two.
As Deborah is rushed to the hospital, investigators examine the deceased victim on scene. A few feet from the body, they find a wallet with an ID for 66-year-old Thomas Waddell.
Looking at his BMV picture, it was easy to identify him as being the deceased.
It's just gone from a home invasion robbery to, now somebody's wrapped up in a blanket. There's going to be a lot more things that are going to need to be done that we need to check out and investigate.
Thomas Wayne Waddell was born July 20th, 1957, and grew up in the greater Cincinnati area.
He had one sister, two loving parents. Him and his sister were very close. They were like best friends.
His parents were religious, Nazarene church, I believe, so he was always in church, close with his family.
He liked to sing, he loved music, he loved woodworking and working with his hands. He's very creative.
Tom graduated from Western Hills High School in 1975. 3 years later, he married his high school sweetheart and started a family of his own. To support them, he began working as a retail manager.
He built stores for Walmart. He did a lot of third shift. So, like when he was home, he was sleeping or he was hanging out with us.
My dad was a really good father. Going fishing, going camping, working in the wood shop with him. He just liked to have a good time with his family.
Being a father came naturally to Tom, but being a husband did not, resulting in the first of multiple divorces.
But he did not like to be by himself. He was married 5 times.
I do not know why my dad's marriages fell apart. I feel like he was looking for something, whether it was with this woman or the next woman.
In 2015, after his children had grown up and started their own families, Tom moved to the town of Zanesville for a fresh start.
He was a manager at Kroger, and everyone respected him and did what he asked of them and had no problems. He made friends easily. He also liked to rescue dogs. At one point in time, he had 12 dogs that he rescued from shelters. I mean, Dad would take his shirt off his back to go help someone. That's how he ended up meeting Deborah Frazier.
They met at work. She's obviously significantly younger than him. She would have been an associate. He was a manager.
Ms. Frazier was born and raised in Zanesville. She worked various jobs as a clerk or as a bagger.
Tom found himself drawn to his reserved 33-year-old coworker.
Deborah Frazier was intriguing. She didn't have a big support group, and she kind of put herself on an island. There were only a couple people that she was close with.
At first, Tom was only trying to help Deborah, who was struggling financially.
I think he just was trying to help her, and then he built that relationship and that bond with her, and that's how the relationship started.
They had a relationship. It was not continuous because she'd moved away to Florida for a period of time.
By the summer of 2023, the couple had moved in together. Tom retired from his job at the grocery store and seemed to have finally found the right woman.
If you look in the apartment, there's pictures of them together. They had a cookbook which said, Tom and Debbie's cookbook. So it was clear they were in a relationship.
But now, their lives have been torn apart. In the aftermath of an apparent break-in, Tom is dead, and Debbie is being rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound. But a closer look at Tom's body brings the timeline of events into question.
I could recognize from my experience that this individual had been deceased longer than the duration of this call.
It was an active, ongoing home invasion and her being shot. It seemed unlikely that they would have taken the time to try to wrap the body up. Now, stuffing it in a closet, pushing it under a bed, maybe, but to wrap it up in plastic bags and then hide it in a closet, those things were not adding up.
The way things are starting to unfold, obviously we're gonna have more questions.
Coming up, Deborah relives the attack.
I was so scared. The one assailant with a gun.
And their victim provides crucial evidence to help identify his killer.
There was a hair found between his fingers, long and dark.
Police in Zanesville, Ohio, are investigating the death of Tom Waddell, a retail store manager whose girlfriend Deborah Frazier was also shot. The first piece of evidence is a gun found at the scene.
The gun we found when Deborah was moved was a .22 caliber revolver, an older model. It was fully loaded with 9 rounds, 2 of which had been spent.
But there is little else to suggest this was a robbery.
There was still money in drawers. There were valuable guns all over the place.
I found a TV in the back bedroom just leaning against the wall that was still connected to a DVD player. When it was laying on the floor, I was able to develop 10 latent lifts on that TV and send them to BCI for an examination.
A lot of times when you have home invasions, they look completely wrecked. Mr. Waddell's apartment was pretty well kept. The couch cushions weren't pulled up and thrown everywhere like people were looking for something particular. It was just kind of like things were pushed around, disheveled, and then there were some torn shreds of photos, actually of Mr. Waddell and Miss Frazier, which seemed odd for a home invader.
Further inspection of the crime scene raises more red flags.
In one of the bottom kitchen cabinets, I found an open box of trash bags. They have blue, like plastic straps on them, and those is the same kind that was on Thomas Waddell's body.
We found black duct tape that was a couple cabinets over from where the trash bags were found.
That also didn't make sense because someone who's ransacking an apartment or wrapping up a body is not going to return the tape to the cabinet where it came from.
I just had that feeling that, this was staged.
Hoping to reconcile the discrepancies, investigators stop by Deborah's hospital room to speak with her before she's taken in for surgery.
Today I came back after being gone for like a couple days. I was visiting a friend, and then when I came back, I noticed the door was unlocked. I went in because I didn't know if Tom maybe just forgot to lock the door or whatever. I'd been texting and calling, and there was no response. And then I saw things were messed up, and that's when I decided to call 911.
Okay. And tell me about you getting shot.
Well, I saw them,
Saw who?
the assailants, yahoos, such,
She said the first guy was wearing gloves, a hoodie, and a ski mask, but she could make out that he was a white guy. The second guy she couldn't give a very good description of.
It was kind of like a little bit of a scuffle, so I tried to grab the gun.
By the barrel?
I think so, because when he aimed, I was just trying to grab it so it wouldn't, if it went off, it wouldn't be in my direction, but I'm not that strong, so he ended up firing it in my leg.
Okay.
With doctors ready to prepare Deborah for surgery, detectives wrap up their interview and collect Deborah's phone and bloody clothing into evidence. After leaving the hospital, they canvass Tom and Deborah's neighborhood looking for potential witnesses.
That apartment complex is pretty nice, well-maintained, and is on a part of the city that we don't have a lot of crime.
No one reported hearing a gunshot, no one heard any type of struggles, no one saw anybody running.
There are some ring cameras that are accessible. They see nothing on those.
So the story that she's told us, the statements we've got from witnesses, it's not adding up to be the home invasion robbery, minus the commotion on the 911 call of two people that would have allegedly just murdered someone and then shot someone else that make absolutely no sound at all. So we're going to want to continue to look further.
The following morning, the medical examiner conducts an autopsy on Tom Waddell. Detectives hope it will provide some much-needed answers.
It's not until they get to the autopsy that they realize how well wrapped up this body is. It's wrapped in plastic and then plastic bags and then a comforter.
It's not something that you could do rather quickly. I mean, you know, it's going to take time to get him under those many layers.
We want to deal with each layer that he's wrapped in separately, looking for evidence and trying to figure out what is going on in this case.
There was a hair found in Tom's left hand between his fingers that was long and dark.
That is completely different than his hair, so that was put and packaged so that the laboratory can look at it. And he has a blue strap around each lower leg.
We weren't sure who did it, and we weren't sure how they moved him back there, but we thought that the Velcro straps could have been used to pull him back there.
With the wrappings removed, the cause of death becomes clear.
Seeing all the blood on his face and in his hair, we figure that is where the injury is. So just cleaning his hair, I find a gunshot wound.
The morning after 66-year-old Tom Waddell was found dead in his apartment, the medical examiner in Licking County, Ohio, has discovered how he was killed.
It was determined that he had died from a single gunshot to the back of the head, a .22 long rifle round.
The bullet matches the same caliber that was removed from Ms. Frazier's leg, which matches the gun that was found at the scene.
Most importantly, the medical examiner is able to determine how long ago Tom was murdered.
There is a series of steps that the muscles go through in rigor mortis. This gentleman had the stage where his rigor is waning away. So that, to me, meant that he had been dead approximately 24 to 36 hours prior to when I'm looking at him.
Sometime between 8 p.m. on August 9th and 2 a.m. on August 10th, approximately 12 to 16 hours prior to us getting the call.
At that point, that didn't make sense based on the timeline. Why would you kill somebody, get to the extent of taking your time to wrap them up, put them in a closet, and then come back a whole day later? That didn't make a lot of sense. Why wouldn't you just do it right now and distance yourself from the scene?
The evidence suggests Deborah might not be telling the truth about what happened.
It's starting to look like she might have a hand in it. We don't know exactly yet, but her story isn't adding up. We're going to want to continue to look further, try to find any type of motive that she might have, so we would obtain a search warrant for her phone.
We found in her wallet a card, and it had writing on it, and it was, I believe, a 6-digit code. And Sergeant Michael, who conducts the data extractions, he entered the PIN code, and it unlocked the phone.
They find a question that was put into her phone, being researched on the internet.
It was 8:16 a.m. on the morning of the 10th. How long does GSR stay on the skin?
When you talk about GSR, you're talking about gunshot residue. That was definitely an indicator to me that she had more involvement than what she was saying. Now, whether she was the actual person who shot him at that point, we didn't know, but she definitely, in my mind, had some involvement in this homicide.
That afternoon, once her wounds have been stabilized, detectives ask Deborah to repeat her version of events.
Deborah tells us that she had gone to hang out with her friend, John Anderson.
We drove around for a while, and then I ended up asking him if I could just spend the night. We played video games, we watched TV. He's an old friend from my early college years.
She told us the next day, after staying with Mr. Anderson, she returns to her residence, and it's at that point in time that she finds Tom, and this whole home invasion occurs.
When was the last time you ever fired a gun?
Last time I ever fired a gun? When I was wrestling, trying to get the gun pointed away from me, I had a hold of it when it went off.
Well, what do you think happened to Tom?
I honestly don't know. I even tried calling today.
Well, Tom was shot and killed. It's all right, you can take a minute.
In my opinion, it sounded like she was fake crying. It didn't seem real at all.
Why are you searching? How long does gunshot residue stay on my hands? Yesterday morning at 8 in the morning. Listen, you did.
I didn't.
Now I'm gonna ask you to be 100% honest with me. Did you have something to do with his death?
No.
And I'm gonna be as straight as possible. I've probably been a cop now for about 20 years. This isn't the first murder investigation that I've ever handled. It's not gonna be the last. There was no home invasion robbery, okay? There was absolutely none. So, you've already locked yourself into the biggest lie. Here's your chance to unwind it and tell the truth. We know that you were involved. You shot him with the .22.
I didn't.
Yes, you did, right in the top of the head.
I didn't do it.
You can't even explain why you have those search history in your phone. Stand in my shoes here for a second. How's that look on you?
Bad.
Backed into a corner, Deborah still maintains her innocence. When pressed for more information about John Anderson, the man she'd stayed with the night before finding Tom's body, she insists he's just a friend. But detectives wonder if something more was going on, and if it led to Tom's murder.
We need to go get John right away before he gets and talks to her, so if he is involved, that, their stories don't change.
Coming up, detectives interview Deborah's other boyfriend.
Did you guys sleep in the same room? We did.
And another mysterious death is revealed.
You now have 2 separate individuals that died under suspicious causes.
A day after Tom Waddell was found murdered, detectives visit John Anderson in Zanesville, Ohio, to ask about his relationship with suspect Deborah Frazier.
At the time that interview was happening, there's still open questions. And among those open questions is she the trigger man? Is she not? Is she just involved? Is there another person?
He's her alibi. He definitely could be an accomplice.
So the reason I want to talk to you is in reference to Deborah. Start from when I guess how you know her, how long you've known her and stuff like that.
She and I met in late 2012. She and I were in a relationship for about 10 years or more.
Okay. Did you guys break up then, I take it?
No.
Oh, are you currently still boyfriend and girlfriend?
Technically, yes.
John confirms he received a call from Deborah on August 9th.
John told us that Deborah was very panicked. She was stressed and he just wanted to help her any way that he could. But he did that by being there for her and driving her around all night.
He drove her up to Dresden, which is a town about 10 minutes north of Zanesville.
What made you decide to drive to Dresden? Did she request that?
She did. I thought she wanted to get out of the house.
What happened after that?
She and I drove back to Oakland and we just went to sleep. We went to bed.
Did you guys sleep in the same room?
We did.
He told us he dropped her off the next morning at her apartment. He couldn't remember an exact time.
We asked him if he knows who Tom was. He had no clue. So we laid it out to Johnny that, Deborah and Tom were in a relationship, and he just seemed floored. He just couldn't believe what was being told to him.
His understanding from Ms. Frazier was that she was working as a home healthcare live-in for Mr. Waddell because he had dementia. And so he is very, very shocked by all this.
And you've never been in her apartment at all?
Never.
So, the only reason I ask you that, and I don't have a reason to doubt you at any point right now, is because we collected some biological evidence that's gonna have some DNA on it. Would your DNA be found in that apartment on any type of weapon or any type of duct tape or trash bags or anything like that?
No.
Anderson gives them permission to search his cell phone, and they are able to use the geolocation services to essentially track and verify everything that he says.
There was no evidence in the apartment that had anything to do with him, and it truly seemed like he had nothing to do with the offense other than being manipulated and lied to by Deborah Frazier.
With John's statement, investigators have enough circumstantial evidence to get warrants for Deborah and Tom's digital records.
There were more than 20 warrants that were issued to collect information on emails, phone records, location services, financial records.
We get the bank records, and there was some pretty large monetary withdrawals from the bank, and Mr. Waddell being a retiree on a fixed income, those type of expenditures, not consistent generally with a person who's on a fixed income.
Deborah's phone contains evidence she may have been behind the withdrawals.
We were able to see that she had created a PNC fraudulent claims at gmail.com email address where she was fabricating emails, we believe, to show Tom so that she could steal money from him.
The emails stopped, strangely enough, on the 9th. There's nothing after that to Mr. Waddell about fraud. And it really starts to add up as to, okay, what was the motive behind Ms. Frazier killing Mr. Waddell?
Investigators request a full extraction of Deborah's account from her provider, including any deleted data. They also returned to the scene of the crime to search for any evidence that might have been overlooked.
Thomas Waddell had been shot in the back of the head. We just didn't know where.
Just inside the front door, right beside where Deborah Frazier was laying when we found her, was a recliner. The recliner that was facing the TV there in the living room had a blanket folded over the top of the headrest. And when we moved the blanket, we found a blood stain.
Looking how tall Tom was, where his actual gunshot wound was at on the top of his head, that suggests that Tom was sitting in his recliner when he was shot.
One mystery has been solved, but the discovery creates a new one.
Tom was a big guy, and Deborah's not big, and so even moving his body from the recliner and into the bedroom was going to be a very significant task for Deborah.
We believe she had some help getting him there.
Detectives determined Deborah's boyfriend, John Anderson, was not involved, but lab results provide another potential accomplice.
The prints from the television come back, and they come back to a guy from Florida named David Grantham.
This particular individual had some petty theft crimes and some receiving stolen property crimes, so it's not a far leap.
This was a lead that we were going to have to track down.
Days into their investigation of Tom Waddell's murder, detectives have a new suspect, Florida resident David Grantham.
We're looking to see whether or not Mr. Grantham had a good alibi, and in this case, he had a rock-solid alibi, and that was that he was in fact dead.
According to Florida records, David Grantham died in February 2021, 2.5 years ago.
He died of a drug overdose that was called in by his roommate at the time.
And when detectives learn that roommate's name, it's one they recognize.
I called down to Tavares. I had their police department forward the information, and when they sent me the investigation, I found that Deborah Frazier was the person that called 911.
She had recently moved back from Florida to Ohio, which would explain why Grantham's fingerprints were still on the TV.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes at this point that are both tied to the same female.
It all seemed a little odd. When reading the reports, it didn't seem that they thought there was any type of foul play.
Is there any evidence of foul play in Mr. Grantham's death? No. Does this coincidence make it go from not suspicious death to, well, maybe something might have happened? Maybe, but in the world of prosecution, we don't deal with might have happened.
It was, I believe, deemed to be a drug overdose, and she just happened to be the person that was living with him at the time that found him and called it in.
To investigators, one thing seems certain: Deborah's involvement in Tom's murder. And when the requested data from her email account comes in, some deleted entries confirm those suspicions.
Some of the other searches that were found on Deborah Frazier's phone included how to load a revolver or a gun, what size ammo do you need, what if the ammo is wrong, how to uncock the hammer on a revolver, on a .22, and maybe most importantly, the worst place to get hit in the head.
To me, it suggested that she had been planning something, at least for days, but some of the searches went back as far as a week and a half.
Deborah's account also reveals she was connected to Wi-Fi at the apartment she shared with Tom on the night of his death. For detectives, the only thing missing now is a proverbial smoking gun.
After sending all of our evidence off to the crime lab, We were able to get back the hair that was discovered during the autopsy, both in the Velcro and Tom's hands, and a fingerprint off of the duct tape. And that led back to Deborah Frazier. And there's only one way that it could have gotten there.
However, the question of how Deborah managed to pull off the murder on her own still remains.
Based upon the evidence where the blood was located and the nature of the entry wound into the head, we believe that she walked up behind him. He is either asleep in the recliner or watching a TV show, and she gets to a very close range and she pulls the trigger, killing him. The Velcro straps were important because you can imagine that what had happened is she had used those as leverage to try to drag his body on her own to the closet. I think it was at the point where she started to move him that it really dawned on her that her plan had a lot of flaws and she was not going to be able to get him out of the house by herself. And if she couldn't get him out of the house by herself, how was she going to be able to explain it?
That's where she came up with the home invasion.
On September 7th, 2023, Deborah Frazier is arrested at the hospital.
So after Deborah is medically cleared from the hospital to be released, she's arrested.
Ms. Frazier is charged with aggravated murder, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse.
Deborah immediately asks for an attorney, and police and prosecutors know their work isn't done.
We want to be thorough. We want to make sure we have a solid prosecution. You only get one shot at it.
We're still working the case, but in my mind, there's no doubt of her involvement. We just need to keep going. We want to get as much information, enough evidence as we can, so it leaves no doubt with anyone that could be in this jury. Her background, from what we dug into, it seemed normal, but ultimately we'd found out in the prior months of this, there was a lot of deception going on with Deborah.
She was a consistent manipulator and liar, and she certainly was engaged in some real manipulation related to false allegation of rape.
With Deborah Frazier awaiting trial for the murder of her boyfriend, Tom Waddell, investigators spend the next several months shoring up the case for prosecutors. As they dig deeper into Deborah's life, they find a long history of lies and manipulation.
We went and talked to her dad at one point, and he had basically explained that because of her, there were allegations brought on he and his late wife.
We'd found the call where she had alleged some abuse on her parents that was unfounded. So they really didn't have a good relationship.
As the investigation was progressing, we were contacted by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and they had been investigating a rape allegation that she made that happened at Dillon State Park.
She stated that a man came up to her and tried to pull her pants off and used a knife to threaten her with it. She has a mark on her that was superficial, but it was not a substantial injury.
They had found out a number that she claimed to be a witness was actually a fake number that she created that came back to her Gmail account.
I don't know that I've ever dealt with a person who was so dishonest and so manipulative with so many people over such a long period of time.
It was just amazing how far that she had got in this fantasy world that she was living in.
Prosecutors theorized that Tom's discovery Deborah was draining his bank account led to his death.
I ultimately think what caused Deborah to snap was that another world of lies was collapsing around her. She had Mr. Anderson as a boyfriend. She had Mr. Waddell as a boyfriend. They didn't know about each other, but she was using Mr. Waddell's resources to live. and those resources had slowly been drained off. When that was discovered, she was going to be exposed as being a fraud, and she couldn't have that happen.
I also think that there was kind of a heartbreak story behind it. We found in the living room a bunch of torn up pictures of Tom and Deborah. Whether it was Tom, whether it was Deborah, I'm not real sure, but there was some kind of lost love, heartache there.
Every conclusion that we've made about her motives are conclusions that we drew from the evidence at the scene and all the collected data, but it's never been actually explained by Deborah herself.
In March 2024, Deborah Frazier decides to plead guilty instead of facing a jury.
They read the details of everything. It was gruesome and it was wrong and it was foul. And it angers me just sitting here and talking to you about it now. Like, he didn't deserve that. No one deserves that.
She is sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole in 23 years.
I would have liked to seen life, no parole, but at the end of the day, she's behind bars and she can't hurt anybody. I try to honor my father's memory by teaching my kids and raising my kids the way he taught me. Do unto others as you want them to do to you. Try to solve problems by talking. Be laid back, have fun. Just be a good person.
One of the last messages my dad sent to me, he was telling me how proud that he was of me for being the mom that I was to the boys that I have. My boys loved him so much, so this hit them hard too. So I talk about him when I can, but it's still really fresh, so it's still really hard.
The first thing investigators noticed was the silence. Not the silence of an empty house. Not the silence of a neighborhood asleep after midnight. It was the silence of a place where something had happened, something irreversible, something that left behind questions no one could answer. For 30 years, the old Harper family farmhouse stood at the edge of Blackwood County like a monument to a mystery that refused to disappear. The paint peeled from the wooden walls. The fields surrounding the property changed hands. New roads cut through the countryside. Children who once searched the nearby woods for clues grew into adults who still remembered the same unanswered question whispered through their town. What happened to the Harper family? On a cold November morning in 1994, 4 members of the Harper family vanished without warning. No goodbye. No phone call. No sign of a struggle. Just an abandoned home. A kitchen table still set for breakfast. And a mystery that would haunt investigators for decades. The disappearance became known as Blackwood County's most disturbing cold case. For years, detectives followed hundreds of leads. They interviewed neighbors, searched abandoned properties, studied old records, and chased rumors that seemed to appear from nowhere. Every possible explanation was considered. Every theory eventually collapsed. But 30 years later, when investigators believed the truth might be buried forever, an unexpected confession reopened the case and sent shockwaves through the entire community. A confession from someone no one expected. The story began on a quiet street outside Blackwood County, where the Harper family lived a life that seemed ordinary from the outside. Thomas Harper was 42 years old, a respected mechanic who had spent nearly 2 decades repairing cars at his small garage downtown. People described him as patient, dependable, and the kind of person who remembered every customer's name. His wife, Elaine Harper, was 39. She worked as a librarian at the local community center and was known for organizing reading programs for children. Friends said Elaine had a gift for making people feel noticed, even when they felt invisible. Their 2 children, 16-year-old Michael and 11-year-old Sophie, completed what neighbors described as a quiet but happy family. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. They were simply a family living a normal life in a small town where everyone knew everyone. And that was what made their disappearance so terrifying. Because in a place where secrets were difficult to keep, an entire family disappeared overnight. The last confirmed sighting of the Harpers came on the evening of November 18, 1994. A neighbor, Linda Walsh, later told investigators she saw Thomas outside the family home around 8:30 p.m. He was standing near his truck, appearing to look toward the tree line behind the property. At the time, Linda thought nothing of it. She waved. Thomas waved back. That was the last time anyone outside the family saw him alive. The next morning, the Harper garage never opened. Customers arrived expecting Thomas to be there, but the doors remained locked. At first, no one was alarmed. People in small towns understood that plans changed. Cars broke down. Emergencies happened. But by noon, concern began spreading. Elaine did not show up at the library. Michael missed school. Sophie never arrived at her friend's house, where she was supposed to spend the afternoon. Calls went unanswered. The front door of the Harper home was unlocked. Inside, investigators found a scene that created more questions than answers. Breakfast dishes sat on the kitchen counter. A half-finished cup of coffee remained near the sink. A family calendar on the refrigerator showed upcoming appointments, birthdays, and holiday plans. Everything suggested the Harpers had expected to return. But they never did. There was no obvious sign of forced entry. No broken windows. No overturned furniture. No blood. No note. Nothing that explained why 4 people would suddenly leave behind everything they owned. The first theory was voluntary disappearance. Investigators considered whether the family had left intentionally. Maybe Thomas had financial problems. Maybe there was a hidden conflict. Maybe they had chosen to start over somewhere else. But the evidence did not support it. Their bank accounts were untouched. Their vehicles remained at the property. Their passports were still inside the house. Their personal belongings were left behind. The family had vanished, but their lives had not. And that detail became the first major mystery of the investigation. If they left willingly, why did they leave everything behind? The search began immediately. Police teams moved through the surrounding woods with flashlights and search dogs. Volunteers from across the county joined the effort. Helicopters scanned the fields surrounding the Harper property. For weeks, Blackwood County became consumed by the disappearance. Posters with the Harper family's faces appeared in stores, restaurants, and gas stations. People who had never met them searched, because everyone in town felt connected to the same fear. If a family could disappear from their own home without explanation, then no one felt completely safe. But as the months passed, hope began to fade. No credible sightings. No confirmed evidence. No answers. Only rumors. Some people believed Thomas had discovered something dangerous through his work as a mechanic. Others suggested a family conflict had been hidden from the public. A few rumors became so extreme that investigators publicly asked residents to stop spreading speculation. The case became a symbol of frustration, a mystery that refused to move forward. Then, 5 years after the disappearance, investigators discovered what appeared to be their first real breakthrough. A handwritten letter was found inside an old storage unit that once belonged to a man named Daniel Cross. Cross had been a former employee at Thomas Harper's garage. The letter contained only a few sentences, but one line immediately caught investigators' attention. I know what happened that night. For the first time in years, detectives believed they might finally have a path forward. Daniel Cross was questioned, but his story only created more confusion. He claimed he knew nothing about the disappearance. He said the letter was taken out of context. He insisted he was being blamed for something he did not do. Investigators searched his property. They reviewed his history. They examined every detail of his connection to the Harper family. But once again, the case reached a dead end. The letter became another unanswered question, added to a growing mountain of unanswered questions. Years continued to pass. The Harper children would have grown into adulthood. Their childhood bedrooms remained frozen in time. Their photographs continued hanging in the homes of relatives who refused to give up hope. Every anniversary brought renewed attention. Every anniversary brought the same painful reminder. 30 years had passed. 30 years without answers. 30 years of wondering whether the Harper family was alive somewhere, waiting to be found, or whether the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. Then, in 2024, investigators received a phone call that would reopen the most infamous cold case in Blackwood County history. The voice on the other end was old, tired, shaking, and the words that followed would change everything. I need to tell you what happened to the Harpers. For the first time in 3 decades, detectives heard the one thing they had been waiting for. A confession. The confession came at 2:13 in the afternoon on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of grey autumn day when Blackwood County seemed almost frozen in the past. The streets were quiet. The fields surrounding the old Harper property were covered in mist. And inside the county sheriff's office, a group of investigators listened carefully as a voice from 30 years ago finally returned. The caller identified himself as Daniel Cross, the same Daniel Cross whose name had appeared in the investigation years earlier. The same man connected to the mysterious letter. The same man detectives had questioned, searched, and watched disappear into the background of the case. For decades, investigators believed Daniel Cross might have known more than he admitted. Now, after 30 years of silence, he was ready to speak. But what he revealed was not a simple confession. It was a story filled with fear, regret, and secrets that had remained buried for far too long. When Daniel arrived at the sheriff's office, investigators immediately noticed how different he looked from the man they remembered. In 1994, Daniel Cross had been 28 years old. He was energetic, restless, and known around town as someone who could fix almost anything. He had worked beside Thomas Harper at the garage for nearly 3 years before suddenly quitting just months before the disappearance. Back then, detectives considered him a person of interest. Not because they had proof, because too many details connected him to the case. Daniel knew the Harper family. He knew their routines. He knew the layout of their property. And most importantly, he was one of the last people confirmed to have spoken with Thomas Harper before the family vanished. But after years of investigation, there was never enough evidence to charge him. The case went cold. Daniel left Blackwood County. And the mystery remained. Now, sitting across from investigators decades later, Daniel appeared exhausted by the weight of the secret he had carried. He placed an old envelope on the table. Inside was a photograph investigators had never seen before. It showed Thomas Harper standing outside his garage on the afternoon before his disappearance. Standing beside him was Daniel Cross. But there was something written on the back. A date, a time, and 3 words that immediately caught investigators' attention. Meet me tonight. Daniel told detectives that the photograph was taken after Thomas discovered something disturbing. Something connected to the garage. Something that Thomas believed could put his entire family in danger. For 30 years, investigators had searched for a motive behind the Harper disappearance. They looked for financial problems, personal conflicts, enemies. But Daniel claimed they had been looking in the wrong direction. According to him, Thomas Harper was not running away. He was trying to protect his family. The story Daniel told investigators began months before the disappearance. In the summer of 1994, Thomas discovered unusual activity involving one of his customers. A vehicle had been brought into the garage for repairs. Nothing about the car seemed unusual at first. But while working beneath the vehicle, Thomas noticed something hidden inside the frame. A small metal container. Inside that container were documents. Documents that were never supposed to be found. Daniel told investigators that Thomas became increasingly nervous after discovering them. He started locking the garage earlier. He stopped discussing certain customers. He began checking his surroundings before leaving work. At first, Daniel thought Thomas was simply stressed. But then one night, Thomas finally told him the truth. He had found evidence of a criminal operation operating quietly in Blackwood County. A network involving stolen vehicles, forged records, and people with connections powerful enough to intimidate anyone who got too close. Daniel claimed Thomas wanted to report what he found. But he was afraid. Not for himself. For Elaine, Michael, and Sophie. Investigators listened carefully. For years, the official theory had been that the Harper family disappeared voluntarily or became victims of an unknown attacker. But Daniel's confession introduced a new possibility. The family had not disappeared. They had been taken. The investigators asked the question that had haunted the case from the beginning. Where were they? Daniel lowered his head. He admitted he did not know the full answer. But he knew where the night began. According to Daniel, on November 18, 1994, Thomas called him late in the evening. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Thomas sounded frightened. He told Daniel to come to the Harper property. He said he had found something else. Something worse. Daniel claimed he drove to the farmhouse shortly after 9 p.m. When he arrived, he saw something that never left his memory. Thomas Harper was standing near the edge of the woods. But he was not alone. Another vehicle was parked nearby. A dark sedan. Daniel said he did not recognize the driver, but he recognized the fear on Thomas's face. He described Thomas as someone who looked like he already knew what was about to happen. Daniel said he stayed hidden. He watched. And that decision became the source of his greatest regret. Because according to his confession, what happened next changed everything. Two men approached Thomas. There was an argument. Voices became louder. Daniel could not hear every word, but he heard enough. Thomas mentioned the documents. He mentioned his family. And then the conversation stopped. The next moments were unclear. Daniel told investigators he ran. He said he was afraid. He believed the same people who threatened Thomas might come after him too. And for 30 years, he lived with the knowledge that he might have been able to save the Harper family. The investigators did not interrupt. They allowed him to continue. Because there was one question that mattered more than anything else. Why did Daniel wait 30 years? Why confess now? Daniel's answer was simple. I thought I could forget. But he could not. Every year, he saw the missing posters. Every year, he watched the anniversary reports. Every year, he heard people asking what happened to the Harper family. And every year, he stayed silent. Until he received a letter. A letter that changed his mind. The letter had arrived 3 months earlier. No return address. No name. Just one sentence written inside. You were not the only one who knew. Daniel told investigators he recognized the warning immediately. Someone else from that night was still alive. Someone else knew the truth. And that person wanted Daniel to know they were watching. The investigators immediately focused on the possibility that Daniel's confession was not the end of the mystery. It was the beginning of a new investigation. Because if Daniel was telling the truth, then someone else had been hiding information for 30 years. Someone who had watched a family disappear. Someone who had allowed an entire community to search for answers that were deliberately kept out of reach. The old cold case suddenly became active again. Evidence teams returned to the Harper property. New searches began. Old files were reopened. Every forgotten detail was examined under a new light. And then investigators found something buried beneath years of overlooked evidence. A clue hidden inside the original investigation files. A detail that had been dismissed in 1994. A name that appeared once, then disappeared. A name connected to the dark sedan seen outside the Harper home. A name that would force investigators to question everything they thought they knew about the 30-year mystery. Because the Harper family disappearance was no longer just a cold case. It was a secret waiting to be uncovered. The name buried inside the old investigation file was one that investigators never expected to see again. For 30 years, it had remained hidden among thousands of pages of reports, interviews, photographs, and forgotten notes collected during the original search for the Harper family. A name that had appeared only once. A name that had been mentioned briefly by a witness. A name that detectives in 1994 believed was nothing more than a coincidence. But now, after Daniel Cross's confession, that single detail suddenly carried a different meaning. The name was Victor Hale. In 1994, Victor Hale was a successful businessman in Blackwood County. He owned several auto-related companies, including a vehicle auction business located just outside town. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. He was respected. He donated money to local charities. He attended community events. He had connections throughout the county. To many people, Victor Hale represented success. But behind the polished image was a history that investigators had never fully explored. Because the night the Harper family disappeared, Victor Hale's name appeared in a place it should never have been. A witness statement. The witness was a truck driver named Robert Ellis, who had been passing near the Harper property on the night of November 18, 1994. At the time, Robert told police he saw a dark sedan parked near the Harper driveway. He remembered the vehicle because it was unusual for that road. But when investigators asked if he recognized the car, Robert hesitated. Then he gave them a name. Victor Hale. Detectives followed up. They contacted Hale. They asked where he had been that night. Hale responded calmly. He said he had never been near the Harper property. He said he had no reason to be there. And because investigators had no physical evidence connecting him to the disappearance, the lead was eventually pushed aside. Another dead end. Another unanswered question. But 30 years later, detectives looking through the old files noticed something they had missed. Robert Ellis's original statement contained a detail that had never been properly investigated. He did not just identify the vehicle. He described damage on the passenger side. A deep scratch. A damaged rear light. And according to vehicle records, 1 week before the Harper family disappeared, Victor Hale's company had repaired a sedan matching that description. The discovery changed the entire direction of the investigation. For the first time in decades, detectives had a possible connection between the mysterious vehicle and a person who had been overlooked. But proving what happened on that night would require more than suspicion. They needed evidence. They needed something that survived 30 years. And they needed to know whether Daniel Cross was finally telling the truth. Investigators brought Daniel back for additional interviews. They showed him photographs. They asked him about Victor Hale. Daniel became quiet. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he admitted something he had never revealed before. He knew Victor Hale. Not personally, but he had seen him before. At Thomas Harper's garage. Daniel explained that several months before the disappearance, Victor Hale had brought vehicles to the garage for repairs. At the time, Thomas treated him like any other customer. But after discovering the hidden documents inside the vehicle frame, Thomas began acting differently. Daniel remembered one conversation. Thomas had looked worried. He told Daniel, "Some people have money because they know how to hide things." At the time, Daniel did not understand what Thomas meant. Now, 30 years later, those words sounded like a warning. Investigators began rebuilding the final weeks of the Harper family's life. They discovered that Thomas Harper had secretly copied several documents before his disappearance. Records, names, vehicle information, financial transactions, pieces of a puzzle that suggested something much larger than a simple disappearance. The question became clear. What exactly did Thomas discover? And why would someone go to such lengths to silence him? The answer appeared to be connected to a vehicle theft operation that had existed beneath the surface of Blackwood County for years. Cars were stolen. Identification numbers were altered. Paperwork was manipulated. Vehicles were sold through legitimate businesses, making them almost impossible to trace. According to investigators, Thomas may have accidentally discovered the operation while repairing one of the vehicles involved. But there was still one major problem. The evidence Thomas found had disappeared. No documents. No files. No physical proof. Only a confession from Daniel Cross and decades-old memories. The investigation once again reached a dangerous point. Because memories could be challenged. Stories could change. And after 30 years, everyone involved had a reason to protect themselves. Then came the second major breakthrough. A search of Daniel Cross's old storage unit revealed something hidden behind a false wall. A small wooden box. Inside were items Daniel had kept since 1994. A newspaper clipping about the Harper disappearance. An old photograph. And a small cassette tape. Investigators immediately recognized the importance of the tape. In 1994, before smartphones and digital recordings, cassette tapes were still commonly used. The label on the tape contained only one message. Thomas, November 18th. Detectives carefully preserved the evidence. They listened. At first, there was only static. Then a voice. Thomas Harper, the missing father. The man whose disappearance had haunted Blackwood County for 3 decades. His voice was faint, but the words were clear enough to shock investigators. "If something happens to me, check the records from Hale Motors." The room went silent. After 30 years, the Harper case had finally produced something more than theories. It had produced a warning. A warning from the victim himself. The tape continued for another 20 seconds. Then came a sound. A voice in the background. A second person. Someone Thomas recognized. Someone standing close enough to hear the recording. But before investigators could identify the voice, the tape ended. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. The cold case that had once seemed impossible to solve suddenly had a new direction. The Harpers had not vanished randomly. Thomas had been afraid. He had been collecting evidence. He had been preparing for something. And someone had known. The investigation into Victor Hale moved forward quickly. But when detectives attempted to locate him, they discovered another shocking development. Victor Hale had died 6 years earlier. The man at the center of the new investigation was gone. Unable to answer questions. Unable to explain his connection. Unable to defend himself. For many cases, that would have been the end. A dead suspect. A missing family. A mystery forever unresolved. But investigators discovered something else. Victor Hale had not disappeared from the story when he died. Because before his death, he had left behind a collection of private documents. Documents that had never been examined. Documents that contained a secret hidden for decades. And inside those documents was a name that shocked investigators. A name belonging to someone still alive. Someone who had been part of Blackwood County for years. Someone who had spent 3 decades watching the Harper family mystery remain unsolved. And when investigators uncovered that name, they realized Daniel Cross's confession had only revealed the surface of a much darker truth. Because the person who knew what happened to the Harper family was not a stranger. It was someone who had been there all along. For 30 years, Blackwood County believed the Harper family disappeared into the darkness. But investigators were beginning to understand something far more disturbing. The Harpers had not vanished without a trace. The traces were there. They had been buried beneath years of assumptions, missed connections, and evidence that no one knew how to interpret. And now, hidden inside the private records of Victor Hale, detectives discovered a name that changed everything. A name that had appeared throughout the original investigation. A name that had never been considered suspicious. A name belonging to someone the entire community trusted. The name was Richard Voss. For decades, Richard Voss had been known as one of Blackwood County's most respected figures. He was not a criminal. He was not a fugitive. He was not someone people whispered about. He was the opposite. Richard Voss had been the county's former deputy sheriff. The man who helped lead the search for the missing Harper family. The man who stood beside grieving relatives during press conferences. The man who told the community they would never stop searching for answers. And now investigators were discovering that his name was connected to the very people he had promised to find. The revelation sent shockwaves through Blackwood County. Because if Richard Voss knew something, then the question was no longer whether someone had hidden the truth. The question was how much of the truth had been hidden. The first thing investigators examined was Voss's involvement in the original investigation. At the time of the disappearance, Richard Voss was one of the first officers to arrive at the Harper property. His reports were considered some of the most important documents in the case. He documented the condition of the home. He interviewed neighbors. He helped organize search efforts. He was one of the people responsible for preserving evidence. But now, detectives reviewing the old files noticed something unusual. Several pieces of evidence mentioned by other officers were missing from Voss's official reports. Small details. Details that seemed meaningless at the time. But together, they created a troubling pattern. A neighbor reported seeing a second vehicle near the Harper home. The detail was briefly mentioned, then disappeared. A witness described an argument near the property. The statement was filed away. A possible connection between Thomas Harper and Victor Hale was never fully investigated. And every time the investigation reached a critical point, the trail seemed to fade. Investigators began asking a terrifying question. Was the investigation itself manipulated? The possibility was difficult to accept. Richard Voss had been the person searching for the truth. But what if he had also been the person controlling how close anyone could get to it? Detectives reopened every interview connected to Voss. They spoke with retired officers, former investigators, people who had worked alongside him in 1994. One former detective, named Alan Mercer, remembered something strange. He said that during the first week of the investigation, Richard Voss repeatedly insisted that the family probably left voluntarily. At the time, Mercer thought Voss was simply following a theory. But looking back 30 years later, he questioned why Voss seemed so determined to move attention away from the possibility of foul play, especially when the evidence suggested something else. The Harper home had not looked abandoned. It looked interrupted, like something had happened suddenly, like someone had expected the family to return. The deeper investigators looked, the more questions appeared. Then came another discovery. Inside Victor Hale's documents was a payment record from 1994. A large financial transfer. The recipient was not a company, not a business, not an organization. It was Richard Voss. The payment had been disguised as a consulting fee. But investigators found no record of any legitimate service Voss provided. The amount was significant, large enough to raise immediate concerns. The timing was even more suspicious. The payment was made just weeks before the Harper family disappeared. For investigators, this was the first major connection between Victor Hale and Richard Voss. Two names that had existed separately in the case for decades, now connected by money. But money alone did not explain what happened. It did not explain where the Harper family went. It did not explain what happened on the night of November 18th. and it did not explain why Daniel Cross had waited 30 years to speak. Investigators returned to Daniel with the new information. They asked him about Richard Voss. His reaction was immediate. Fear. Not confusion. Not surprise. Fear. Daniel admitted that he had seen Richard Voss near the Harper property that night. A detail he had never told police. A detail he said he was too afraid to reveal. According to Daniel, after he saw Thomas Harper arguing with two men near the dark sedan, another vehicle arrived. A police vehicle. Daniel remembered the lights. He remembered the uniform. And he remembered Richard Voss stepping out. For 30 years, Daniel carried that memory. Because in that moment, he realized the person who was supposed to protect people might be connected to the people causing harm. Daniel told investigators that was the moment he ran. He believed that if a deputy sheriff was involved, then no one in Blackwood County could be trusted. The investigators now had a completely different picture of the disappearance. Thomas Harper had discovered something dangerous. He had tried to protect his family. Someone connected to a criminal operation had confronted him, and a law enforcement officer may have helped cover it up. But one question remained. Where were the Harpers? The search for answers moved beyond Blackwood County. Investigators examined old properties connected to Victor Hale. They searched abandoned buildings. They reviewed land records. They looked for anything that could explain what happened after the family disappeared. Then, nearly 30 years after the Harper home became a crime scene, investigators discovered something hidden beneath an old structure on land once owned by Hale Motors. A buried metal container. Inside were photographs, documents, and a handwritten map. The map showed several locations across Blackwood County. One location had been circled, a remote area known as Black Ridge. The same place investigators had searched in 1994. The same place they believed had nothing to do with the disappearance. But now, after decades, a new possibility emerged. Someone had wanted investigators to look away from Black Ridge. Someone had known something was there. And as detectives prepared to search the location again, they uncovered one final detail written on the map. A message. Only 4 words. Words that suggested someone involved in the disappearance had been afraid. Do not trust him. The question was no longer whether Richard Voss knew the truth. The question was what he had done to keep it hidden. And somewhere beyond the abandoned roads of Black Ridge, investigators believed they were finally getting closer to the answer. Closer to the Harper family. Closer to the night that changed Blackwood County forever. And closer to a secret that had survived for 30 years. The search at Black Ridge began before sunrise. For 30 years, the abandoned stretch of land had been nothing more than a forgotten corner of Blackwood County. A place where trees grew wild, where old roads disappeared beneath weeds, and where locals rarely traveled unless they had a reason. But on that morning, the area became the center of the biggest cold case investigation the county had ever seen. Investigators arrived with new equipment, updated technology, and something they never had in 1994. A reason to believe the truth was waiting beneath the ground. The handwritten map found inside the metal container had changed everything. For years, detectives searched for the Harper family by following the evidence they had at the time. But the evidence had been incomplete. Pieces were missing. Records had vanished. Witnesses stayed silent. And now investigators believed the person who created the map had left behind a final message for someone brave enough to find it. Do not trust him. The words remained in the minds of every detective who stepped onto Black Ridge. Because everyone knew exactly who that message might be referring to. Richard Voss, the former deputy sheriff, the man who helped lead the search, the man who promised the community he would find the truth, the man who might have spent 30 years hiding it. As search teams moved through the property, investigators focused on a specific area marked on the map, an old logging road that had not been used in decades. The road ended near a damaged concrete structure that once belonged to an abandoned storage facility. The building had been inspected in 1994. Nothing was found. At least, that was what the official reports claimed. But when investigators examined the area again, they noticed something strange. The foundation had been altered. A section of concrete appeared newer than the rest. Not recently built, but newer compared to the original structure. It was a detail that had been overlooked decades earlier. A detail that now seemed impossible to ignore. The team began removing layers of debris. Hours passed. The silence of Black Ridge was broken only by the sound of equipment and the movement of investigators searching for answers that had waited 30 years to be found. Then, shortly after noon, someone called out. They had found something. Beneath the concrete floor was a hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed container. The discovery immediately changed the atmosphere. Everyone knew what this could mean. Evidence from the night the Harper family disappeared. A clue that could finally explain what happened. The container was carefully removed and transported for examination. Inside were several items. A damaged wallet, a collection of photographs, a small notebook, and a key. The wallet belonged to Thomas Harper. For the first time in 30 years, investigators recovered something that clearly belonged to one of the missing family members. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department, because it proved something investigators had feared. The Harper family did not leave willingly. They had not started a new life. They had not disappeared by choice. They had been victims of something much darker. The notebook became the most important item. Its pages were damaged by moisture, but much of the writing remained readable. The entries were not daily notes. They were fragments, short observations, names, dates, warnings. Thomas Harper had been documenting everything. And one name appeared repeatedly. Victor Hale. But another name appeared even more. Richard Voss. The notebook revealed that Thomas had suspected both men were connected long before his disappearance. He had written about meetings, financial transactions, conversations he overheard. But the most disturbing entry was written just days before November 18, 1994. Thomas wrote, "If they know I have the copies, they will come for my family." The investigators reading the note understood immediately. Thomas had not simply discovered information. He had copied it. He had created evidence. And someone had been trying to find it. The question became, where were the copies? Because if Thomas created backup evidence, there was a chance the truth about the entire operation still existed somewhere. The investigators searched the container again. They found no documents, no files, only the damaged notebook. Then they noticed something unusual. The key. It was not a house key. It was not a vehicle key. It belonged to a safety deposit box. A safety deposit box connected to a local bank that no longer existed. Investigators immediately began tracing records. The bank had closed years earlier. Most of its information had been transferred. But one record remained. A safety deposit box opened under the name Thomas Harper. The box had never been emptied. For 30 years, it had remained untouched. The discovery created a new wave of urgency. Because somewhere inside that box might be the evidence Thomas died trying to protect. But investigators were not the only people searching. Someone else was watching. Within 24 hours of the Black Ridge discovery, the sheriff's office received an anonymous warning. The message was short. Stop digging. No signature. No explanation. But the investigators knew what it meant. Someone was afraid. Someone who believed the secrets of 30 years ago should stay buried. The investigation continued anyway. The safety deposit box was opened under strict supervision. Inside was something that shocked everyone. Not because of what was there, but because of what it proved. Thomas Harper had planned for the possibility that he might not survive. Inside the box were copies of documents, photographs, names, and a recorded statement. A message prepared in case the truth was never discovered. Investigators played the recording. For the first few seconds, there was only static. Then Thomas Harper's voice appeared. Older recordings often carried imperfections. Background noise. Distortion. But his fear was unmistakable. If you are hearing this, then something happened to me and my family. The room became silent. After 30 years, the missing father was finally speaking again. Thomas continued. He explained that he had uncovered a criminal operation connected to stolen vehicles and illegal financial deals. But then he revealed something far more disturbing. The operation was protected from inside law enforcement. Someone with authority. Someone who could control the investigation. Someone who could erase evidence. Then Thomas said the words that would become the most important clue in the entire case. I trusted the wrong person. Investigators immediately believed the message was referring to Richard Voss. But Thomas had not finished. Before the recording ended, he revealed one final secret. A secret that suggested the Harper disappearance involved more people than anyone realized. Because Thomas named another person. Someone investigators had never suspected. Someone who was still alive. Someone who had been close to the Harper family. The recording ended before Thomas could explain. The final seconds contained only one sound. A door opening. Then silence. The discovery of the recording transformed the case. For 30 years, Blackwood County searched for a missing family. Now investigators realized they were searching for something even bigger. A conspiracy. A cover-up. And a truth that had been protected by people willing to let an entire community suffer. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Who was the person Thomas Harper trusted? And why had that person allowed the Harper family to disappear? As detectives prepared to reveal the identity hidden inside Thomas's final message, another shocking development emerged. The person Thomas named was already in the original investigation. Not as a suspect, not as a witness, but as someone who had been standing closer to the Harper family than anyone knew. And when investigators uncovered that connection, they realized the mystery had never been as far away as they believed. It had been standing right beside them all along. The name recorded in Thomas Harper's final message remained sealed inside the investigation room for hours. Detectives replayed the recording again and again. They slowed the audio. They enhanced the background noise. They examined every word Thomas spoke before the tape abruptly ended. Because one sentence had changed the entire direction of the case. I trusted the wrong person. For 30 years, investigators searched for an outside threat. A stranger. A criminal passing through town. Someone with no connection to the Harper family. But Thomas's final warning suggested something far more painful. The person responsible was not someone who came from the darkness. It was someone who had been welcomed into their lives. Someone they trusted. Someone who knew their habits. Someone who knew where they kept their secrets. The investigators finally focused on the final name Thomas mentioned before the recording ended. The name was not Richard Voss. It was not Victor Hale. It was someone no one expected. Elaine Harper's closest friend, Marissa Cole. For decades, Marissa Cole had been remembered as one of the people who suffered the most after the Harper disappearance. She was the person who organized searches. The person who spoke publicly about keeping hope alive. The person who helped Elaine's family during the darkest years. To the community, Marissa was not connected to the mystery. She was one of the victims of it. But Thomas Harper's final recording suggested otherwise. Investigators immediately began reviewing everything they knew about Marissa. And for the first time, they noticed details that had been ignored. Details that seemed insignificant in 1994. But now looked different. Marissa had been one of the first people to arrive at the Harper home after the family disappeared. She was there before some investigators. She knew the condition of the house before police officially documented it. She knew what Thomas had been working on. She knew about his concerns. And most importantly, she knew something about the family's plans that almost no one else knew. A week before the disappearance, Elaine had told Marissa that Thomas was afraid. She said he believed someone was watching them. At the time, Marissa comforted her. She told Elaine not to worry. She told her everything would be okay. But investigators now asked a different question. How much did Marissa really know? The investigation into Marissa began quietly. Detectives did not want another mistake. They had already lost 30 years because assumptions had replaced evidence. This time they wanted facts. They examined old phone records, financial records, personal connections, and slowly, a new picture began to form. Marissa Cole had a connection to Victor Hale, a connection she never revealed. Years before the Harper disappearance, Marissa worked as an accountant for a company connected to Hale Motors. She had access to financial records. She understood the paperwork. She knew how money moved. And according to investigators, she may have been the person who helped hide the illegal transactions Thomas discovered. But there was still one question. Why would she help them? Why betray her closest friend? The answer appeared inside another document recovered from the safety deposit box. A financial record. A payment made shortly before the Harper family vanished. The recipient was Marissa Cole. The amount was smaller than the payment made to Richard Voss. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Marissa had received money from Victor Hale. Then the Harper family disappeared. The case that had once seemed like a random tragedy now looked like a carefully constructed operation. But investigators still needed to understand the final night. What exactly happened inside the Harper home? And what role did Marissa play? The answer came from a source no one expected. A former neighbor named Linda Walsh. The same neighbor who had seen Thomas outside the house on the night of November 18, 1994. For years, Linda had lived with a memory she could never explain. A detail she never shared because she was afraid she would be dismissed. When detectives returned to speak with her again, she finally revealed what she had seen. That night, after she waved at Thomas, she noticed another person near the Harper property. A woman, standing near the driveway. Linda said she could not see the person clearly because of the darkness. But she remembered one thing. The woman was carrying a small black folder. A folder similar to the one Elaine Harper used for her library paperwork. At the time, Linda assumed it meant nothing. Now investigators asked a different question. Could the woman have been Marissa? Linda looked at old photographs. She stared silently. Then she gave the answer that shocked detectives. I think it was her. The investigation moved faster. Forensic experts examined the items recovered from Black Ridge. They found fingerprints on the metal container. Most were too damaged to identify. But one set produced a possible match. Marissa Cole. The discovery changed everything. For years, Marissa had been one of the people demanding answers. Now investigators believed she might have been one of the people who knew those answers all along. But before detectives could question her, something unexpected happened. Marissa disappeared. Not physically. She did not run. She did not leave town. But she stopped responding. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Her house remained locked. Her car stayed parked outside. It was as if she had vanished from the investigation overnight. Then, 3 days later, detectives received a package. No return address. No sender. Inside was a single envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten statement. From Marissa. The first line immediately caught investigators' attention. I never wanted anyone to die. The statement was not a confession. Not exactly. But it was the closest thing investigators had received in 30 years. Marissa admitted she knew about Thomas's discovery. She admitted she knew Victor Hale was involved. She admitted she warned Thomas that he was in danger. But she claimed she never helped plan the disappearance. According to Marissa, she had been trying to protect Elaine and the children. She claimed she made one terrible decision. She stayed silent. And that silence allowed everything to happen. The statement continued with a shocking revelation. Marissa claimed Richard Voss was not just involved. He was the person controlling everything. She said Victor Hale was afraid of Voss. She said Thomas Harper was afraid of Voss. And she said she had spent 30 years carrying the guilt of knowing she could have stopped it. But investigators noticed one major problem. Marissa's statement explained the conspiracy. It explained the money. It explained the cover-up. But it still did not answer the biggest question. Where were Thomas, Elaine, Michael, and Sophie Harper? Because a confession about what happened was not enough. The community needed to know what happened to the family itself. And as investigators followed Marissa's final clues, they discovered something hidden in her statement. A location. A place she mentioned only once. A place connected to a secret meeting 30 years earlier. A place that had never been searched. A place where investigators believed the final answer might be waiting. The Harper family mystery had lasted 3 decades. But now, for the first time, detectives were no longer chasing ghosts. They were following a trail. And that trail led directly to the darkest place in Blackwood County. The location hidden inside Marissa Cole's statement was only 3 words. Black Ridge Reservoir. A place most people in Blackwood County had forgotten existed. A place surrounded by thick forests, abandoned roads, and decades of unanswered questions. And now, 30 years after the Harper family vanished, investigators believed the final chapter of the cold case might be buried beneath its dark waters. The discovery immediately changed the investigation. For years, detectives searched homes, vehicles, properties, and abandoned buildings. They searched where people lived, where people worked, where people traveled. But they had never searched where someone could hide something forever. The reservoir was created in the early 1980s to supply water to nearby communities. By 1994, it had become a quiet location away from the main roads. A place where people went to fish. A place where people went to escape. A place where nobody would ask questions. Marissa's statement revealed that on the night the Harper family disappeared, she received a phone call from Elaine Harper. A call that lasted less than a minute. Elaine sounded frightened. She told Marissa that Thomas had discovered something dangerous. She told her that someone they trusted had betrayed them. And then Elaine said something that stayed in Marissa's memory for 30 years. Richard knows. Those 2 words became the center of the investigation. Richard Voss knew. But what did he know? And why did Elaine believe he was involved? According to Marissa, she rushed to the Harper home after receiving the call. But when she arrived, the house was already empty. The lights were on. The kitchen was untouched. The The family's belongings remained inside. But the Harpers were gone. Marissa claimed she saw Richard Voss leaving the property. She said he looked calm. Too calm. And when she confronted him, he warned her to stay quiet. He told her that if she cared about Elaine and the children, she would forget what she saw. For 30 years, Marissa carried those words. She said she stayed silent because she believed speaking out would make things worse. But investigators now had a different question. What happened after the Harper family left the house? Marissa's answer pointed directly to Black Ridge Reservoir. She claimed she later discovered that Richard Voss had access to a small maintenance road leading to the water. A road normally restricted to county employees. A road that appeared nowhere in the original investigation reports. A road that could have allowed someone to move without being seen. When investigators arrived at the reservoir, they brought everything. Divers. Search teams. Ground-penetrating equipment. Specialists who had never been involved in the original case. The atmosphere was different from the searches of 1994. Back then, they were looking for a missing family. Now, they were searching for evidence of a crime hidden for decades. The first day produced nothing. The second day produced nothing. Rumors began spreading that investigators had once again followed a false lead. But on the morning of the third day, something appeared on the sonar equipment. A shape beneath the water. Something large. Something unnatural. The search team marked the location. Divers entered the reservoir. Minutes passed. Then the radio went silent. Everyone waited. Then came the message. We found something. The discovery was not what investigators expected. It was not a vehicle. It was not a body. It was a metal storage case, similar to the one found at Black Ridge. Inside were personal items. A watch. A necklace. A family photograph. And a small notebook belonging to Sophie Harper, the youngest member of the family. The discovery was devastating, because until that moment, some people still held on to the hope that the Harpers might have survived. But the items confirmed the truth investigators had feared. The family had not simply disappeared. They had left behind evidence of a crime. The notebook was badly damaged. Most pages were destroyed. But one entry remained readable. A sentence written in a child's handwriting. Mom says we have to be quiet until we get home. Investigators stared at the words, because they revealed something important. Sophie was alive after the family left the house. She was alive long enough to understand they were in danger, and she believed they were going home. The question became unbearable. Who convinced them to leave? Who did they trust enough to follow? The answer appeared inside another item recovered from the case. A small photograph. It showed the Harper family standing outside their home. But investigators noticed something unusual. The photograph had been taken on the same day they disappeared. And standing in the background was a person. A person who should not have been there. Richard Voss. The image proved something investigators had suspected for weeks. Voss was not just connected to the case. He was physically present on the day the Harper family vanished. For 30 years, he had allowed the community to believe he was only searching for answers. But now, evidence suggested he may have been part of the mystery from the beginning. The investigation immediately shifted. Richard Voss became the primary focus. But there was one problem. He was dead. Voss had died 8 months earlier after a sudden heart attack. He never faced questioning. He never answered accusations. He never explained his connection to the Harper disappearance. To investigators, it felt like another person had escaped justice. But then they discovered something hidden inside Voss's personal records. A final document. A handwritten letter. A letter he had prepared shortly before his death. And unlike Marissa's statement, Voss's letter did not deny involvement. Instead, it contained a shocking admission. He wrote that he had made one decision 30 years ago that destroyed everything. But he also claimed something unexpected. He said he was not the person who caused the Harper family's disappearance. He claimed someone else was responsible. Someone closer. Someone who had manipulated everyone involved. Someone who had remained hidden while investigators chased the wrong suspects. The letter ended with a single sentence. The truth was never buried at Black Ridge. It was buried inside the family. Those words created a new mystery. What did Richard Voss mean? Was he blaming someone inside the Harper family? Was he creating one final deception? Or was he revealing the truth? Investigators now faced their most difficult challenge. They had evidence connecting Voss. They had evidence connecting Marissa. They had evidence connecting Victor Hale. But the deeper they searched, the more complicated the story became. Because the Harper family disappearance was no longer a simple case of criminals hiding a secret. It was a web of betrayal, fear, and decisions made by people who believed they could control the truth forever. And somewhere inside that web was the final answer. The person who knew what happened after the Harper family left their home. The person who had carried the secret for 30 years. The person who was about to become the most shocking name in the entire investigation. The sentence written in Richard Voss's final letter changed the investigation forever. The truth was never buried at Black Ridge. It was buried inside the family. For detectives, those words were impossible to ignore. After 30 years of searching through abandoned buildings, hidden containers, and forgotten records, the case had suddenly turned inward. Not toward a stranger, not toward a criminal organization, but toward the Harper family themselves. The question that haunted investigators was simple. What secret could a family have been hiding? Because if Richard Voss was telling the truth, then Thomas Harper had not been the only person keeping information hidden. Someone inside the Harper family knew something. Someone inside the Harper family had been connected to the events of November 18, 1994. The investigation entered its most complicated stage. Detectives returned to the Harper home for the first time in years. The property had changed. The trees around the house had grown taller. The old garage where Thomas worked had collapsed. The rooms where the family lived were no longer filled with their belongings. But investigators were not searching for physical evidence anymore. They were searching for patterns, for anything that explained why so many people had been connected to the disappearance. The first discovery came from Thomas Harper's personal records. Inside the safety deposit box, hidden among the documents proving the criminal operation, investigators found a second folder. A folder labeled only with one word: family. Inside were documents Thomas had collected about his own relatives. At first, detectives believed they had discovered another piece of the conspiracy. But as they read through the pages, they realized the truth was much more complicated. Thomas had been investigating someone close to him. Someone who shared his last name. Someone he believed was connected to the events surrounding Victor Hale and Richard Voss. That person was Thomas's younger brother, James Harper. James had not lived in Blackwood County for many years. He moved away in the late 1980s and rarely returned. During the original investigation, police briefly interviewed him. He told them he had not spoken with Thomas for several months before the disappearance. The statement was accepted. Another dead end. But Thomas's private notes suggested something different. He believed James was involved. Not directly in the disappearance, but in the operation that led to it. The investigators began searching for James Harper. They discovered he was still alive, living under a different last name in another state. When detectives contacted him, he agreed to speak. But before answering questions about Thomas, James asked one thing. "Did you find the recording?" The investigators froze. Because James knew about the recording. A recording that had never been publicly revealed. A recording that existed only inside the investigation. They immediately asked how he knew. James remained silent. Then he admitted something he had hidden for 30 years. He had received a copy of Thomas's final message before the family disappeared. The investigators wanted to know why he never came forward. James explained that Thomas had contacted him days before November 18th. He said Thomas was afraid. He believed people around him were dangerous. But Thomas did not ask James for help. He asked him to do something else. Protect the truth. James told investigators that Thomas sent him copies of important documents because he believed someone inside the investigation could make them disappear. He trusted his brother because they shared the same blood. But James admitted he made a terrible mistake. He hid. He was afraid. And when the Harper family vanished, he convinced himself that staying silent was the only way to survive. The investigators asked the question that mattered most. Why did Thomas suspect his own family? James finally revealed the secret. The Harper family had a hidden connection to Victor Hale's operation. A connection that began years before the disappearance. Thomas's father, Robert Harper, had once worked for a company owned by Victor Hale's father. According to James, the Harper family was not simply a victim of the criminal network. They had unknowingly been connected to it for decades. Thomas discovered that his own family history was tied to the operation he was trying to expose. And that discovery destroyed his trust in almost everyone around him. But there was another revelation. James told investigators that Thomas believed someone in the family had been helping Victor Hale. Someone who had access to information. Someone who knew what Thomas was investigating. Someone who could predict his every move. The investigators asked who. James looked away. Then he said the name. Elaine Harper. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Elaine had been remembered as the loving mother who disappeared with her children. The woman who became a symbol of the tragedy. But James's statement suggested another possibility. Elaine knew more than anyone realized. The investigators immediately examined Elaine's background. They discovered something hidden from the original investigation. Before marrying Thomas, Elaine had worked for a financial company connected to Victor Hale. The employment records existed, but they were never linked to the case. She had worked there for 2 years, during the same period when Hale's illegal operation was believed to have expanded. The discovery created a new theory. Was Elaine involved? Was Thomas investigating his own wife? Or was there another explanation? Detectives searched through Elaine's personal items recovered from the Harper home. Among them was a small notebook. A notebook that belonged to Elaine. Most pages contained ordinary details. Shopping lists. Library schedules. Family reminders. But near the end, investigators found several entries that changed everything. The handwriting became rushed. The words became shorter. And one sentence stood out. I tried to stop him. Investigators immediately questioned who him referred to. Thomas? Victor? Richard? The answer remained unclear. But the notebook revealed something important. Elaine was not hiding because she was guilty. She was hiding because she was afraid. The final pages contained references to a meeting. A meeting Elaine planned before the disappearance. A meeting she believed could save her family. The location was written at the bottom of the page. An abandoned church outside Blackwood County. The same location mentioned in Richard Voss's records. The same location connected to Victor Hale. The same location where investigators discovered one final piece of evidence. A photograph. A photograph taken on November 18, 1994. Hours before the Harper family disappeared. The image showed 3 people standing inside the abandoned church. Richard Voss, Victor Hale, and Elaine Harper. The discovery created a wave of disbelief. For 30 years, the town believed Elaine Harper was a victim caught in a nightmare. Now investigators had proof she was part of a meeting at the center of it all. But the photograph raised more questions than answers. Why was Elaine there? Was she working with them? Was she confronting them? Was she trying to protect her family? And why did she disappear that same night? The case had reached a point where every answer created another mystery. The Harper family was no longer just a missing family. They were the center of a secret involving trust, betrayal, and impossible choices. And as investigators examined the final evidence from the abandoned church, they discovered something that would change their understanding of the entire disappearance. Because hidden behind the photograph was a message written by Elaine herself. 5 words. 5 words that suggested the Harper family's disappearance was not what anyone believed. I had no choice. The words written behind the photograph stayed on the investigators' minds long after the evidence was secured. I had no choice. 5 words. Simple. But after 30 years of unanswered questions, those 5 words carried the weight of an entire mystery. Because they changed the way investigators viewed Elaine Harper. For decades, the community remembered her as a victim. A mother. A wife. A woman who disappeared alongside her children in one of Blackwood County's darkest moments. But the photograph from the abandoned church revealed something nobody expected. Elaine Harper was not just someone caught in the middle. She was someone who had walked directly into the center of the danger. The investigators now had to answer the hardest question of the entire case. Was Elaine Harper involved in the disappearance? Or was she trying to stop it? The abandoned church became the next major crime scene. Forensic teams returned to the location where the photograph was taken. The building had been empty for decades. The wooden floors were damaged. The windows were broken. The walls were covered with dust. But investigators believed the truth had been hidden there. Not in the obvious places. In the forgotten details. A small room behind the main hall was examined more carefully. Inside, investigators discovered something that had escaped everyone in 1994. A hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a collection of personal documents. Not from Thomas. Not from Victor Hale. From Elaine. The documents revealed a story completely different from the one everyone believed. Before marrying Thomas Harper, Elaine had not simply worked for a company connected to Victor Hale. She had been investigating it. Years earlier, Elaine worked as a financial assistant at Hale Motors. At first, she believed the company was legitimate. But she began noticing unusual transactions. Missing paperwork. Vehicles that appeared twice in company records. Money moving through accounts that did not make sense. She quietly started keeping copies. Just like Thomas. Just like the man she would eventually marry. Elaine had been collecting evidence long before Thomas discovered the same operation. The investigators realized something shocking. Thomas and Elaine were not hiding secrets from each other. They were protecting the same secret. They were both searching for the truth. But then came the question that changed everything. Why did Thomas's notes suggest he suspected Elaine? The answer was hidden in one of the documents recovered from the church. A letter written by Elaine. A letter addressed to Thomas. But never delivered. The letter explained what happened during the final weeks before the disappearance. Elaine had discovered that someone inside law enforcement was involved. She believed Richard Voss had access to the investigation and could destroy evidence. She wanted to tell Thomas. But she was afraid. Because she also discovered something worse. Someone close to them had been giving information to Victor Hale. Someone who knew their plans. Someone who knew what evidence they had collected. Elaine did not know who it was. But she believed their family was in immediate danger. The letter ended with a sentence that explained the message behind the photograph. I had no choice because they were watching every person I trusted. Investigators finally understood. Elaine was not confessing. She was warning someone. But there was still one mystery. Who was watching them? Who had betrayed the Harper family? The answer came from an unexpected source. A retired employee from Hale Motors named Stephen Grant. Stephen had worked under Victor Hale for years. When investigators showed him the documents recovered from the church, he revealed something he had kept hidden since 1994. He said Victor Hale was not the person controlling the operation. He was only a participant. The real power came from someone else. Someone who used fear and influence to keep people silent. Stephen claimed that Richard Voss was involved. But he also mentioned another name. A name investigators had never connected to the case. Marissa Cole's brother, Ethan Cole. For years, Ethan had remained outside the investigation. He was not a suspect. He was not a witness. He was simply someone from Elaine's past. But investigators discovered that Ethan had worked with Victor Hale before moving away from Blackwood County. He had knowledge of financial records. He understood how the operation worked. And according to Stephen Grant, Ethan was the person who first introduced Victor Hale to Richard Voss. The investigation expanded again. Detectives tracked down Ethan Cole. They found him living quietly under a different name. When questioned, Ethan denied everything. He claimed he left Blackwood County years before the disappearance. He claimed he had no involvement. But investigators discovered a problem. Ethan's fingerprints were found on documents recovered from the abandoned church. Documents that had been hidden for 30 years. The evidence was undeniable. Ethan had been there. The only question was why. When confronted with the evidence, Ethan finally admitted he knew about the operation. But he claimed he was not responsible for what happened to the Harper family. He said he tried to warn them. He said he tried to convince Elaine to leave town. But he arrived too late. Investigators demanded the truth. What happened on the night of November 18th? Ethan finally described the events that led to the disappearance. According to him, Thomas planned to expose Victor Hale and Richard Voss. He had gathered enough evidence to bring them down. But someone discovered his plan. That person contacted Voss. And everything changed. The Harper family was confronted at their home. But Ethan insisted something unexpected happened. Elaine fought back. She refused to cooperate. She threatened to reveal everything. And that was when the situation became dangerous. Ethan claimed he saw the family being taken away. But he said he did not know where they went. He said he was too afraid to follow. The investigators were left with another incomplete story. Another person admitting they knew something. Another person who claimed they tried to help. But the evidence continued pointing toward one final truth. The Harper family disappearance was not a single act of violence. It was the result of years of manipulation. A network of people protecting themselves. And every person connected to the case had hidden something. Then investigators made the discovery that would finally reveal what happened after the Harper family left their home. A final piece of evidence recovered from the abandoned church. A recording. Not from Thomas. Not from Elaine. From Richard Voss. A recording made shortly before his death. A recording that was never meant to be found. When investigators played the audio, they heard a voice filled with regret. A voice that admitted something no one expected. Richard Voss said he had spent 30 years protecting a secret. But he was not protecting Victor Hale. He was not protecting himself. He was protecting someone else. And the identity of that person would finally explain why the Harper family disappeared. Because according to Richard Voss, the person at the center of the entire mystery was not an outsider. It was someone the Harper family loved. The recording began with silence. For several seconds, investigators heard nothing but faint background noise. A low hum, a distant movement, the sound of someone breathing. Then the voice appeared. Richard Voss, the man who had spent 30 years at the center of suspicion. The former deputy sheriff. The person many believed had helped bury the truth. His voice was older than the one remembered from old interviews. Weak. Tired. But clear enough. I know people believe I was the reason the Harper family disappeared. The investigators listening to the recording exchanged silent looks. Because for the first time, Richard Voss was acknowledging what everyone had suspected. He continued. They are right about one thing. I knew more than I admitted. The words confirmed the darkest fears of Blackwood County. Fuchs had lied. He had hidden information. He had allowed an entire community to search for answers while he kept secrets buried. But then he said something unexpected. I was not the person who took them. The room became silent. Because the investigation had reached its most confusing point. Everyone had been connected. Victor Hale, Marissa Cole, Ethan Cole, Richard Voss. But no one had fully explained what happened to the Harper family. Until that moment, Voss's recording revealed the final pieces of the story. He admitted that on November 18, 1994, he arrived at the Harper property after receiving a warning from Victor Hale. Victor claimed Thomas Harper was about to expose the entire operation. He claimed Thomas had collected enough evidence to destroy everyone involved. But Voss said he did not know the full truth. He thought he was going there to control the situation, to convince Thomas to stay quiet, to prevent a scandal. But when he arrived, he realized something was wrong. Thomas was not alone. The Harper family was already outside, and they were not being forced to leave. They were preparing to leave. That revelation changed everything. For 30 years, investigators believed the Harper family was taken from their home. But according to Richard Voss, they left willingly. Not because they wanted to disappear, because they believed it was the only way to survive. Voss explained that Thomas and Elaine had discovered the truth about the operation. They knew evidence existed. They knew powerful people were involved. And they knew the investigation could be controlled. They believed no one in Blackwood County could protect them. So they planned an escape. A secret disappearance. A way to vanish before their enemies could reach them. But there was one person who knew their plan. One person they trusted. And that trust became their greatest mistake. The name appeared at the end of the recording. Marissa Cole. According to Voss, Marissa was not simply a friend who stayed silent. She was the person who convinced Elaine that she could help. She promised she had a way to get them out safely. She promised she knew who could be trusted. But Voss claimed Marissa made a deal. A deal with Victor Hale. She gave them information. She told them when the Harper family planned to leave. And she told them where they would go. The investigators immediately returned to Marissa's statement. The woman who claimed she had spent 30 years carrying guilt. The woman who claimed she tried to help. Now investigators questioned whether her story had been another carefully created lie. But the recording contained one more shocking detail. Voss claimed Marissa was not acting alone. She was protecting someone. Someone closer to the Harper family than anyone imagined. Someone who had the most to lose if Thomas revealed the truth. Someone who had access to the family's plans. Elaine Harper's own sister. Caroline Reed. The name stunned investigators. Caroline had never been part of the original investigation. She had never been considered suspicious. She was remembered as the grieving aunt who helped raise awareness after the disappearance. She attended memorial events. She spoke about missing her sister. She demanded justice. But according to Richard Voss, Caroline knew the truth. Investigators immediately searched through old case files. And there it was. A forgotten detail. 3 days before the Harper disappearance, Caroline made a phone call to Richard Voss. A call that lasted nearly 40 minutes. At the time, investigators considered it normal. Family members often contacted police during stressful situations. But now the timing seemed impossible to ignore. Why was Caroline speaking with Voss before the disappearance? What did she know? Detectives located Caroline, who was now living quietly outside Blackwood County. When questioned, she appeared shocked by the accusations. She denied knowing anything. She denied helping anyone. She denied involvement. But when investigators mentioned the recording, her reaction changed. For a moment, her expression disappeared. Not anger. Not confusion. Fear. Then she asked one question. Did he finally tell you? The investigators knew immediately. They had found the person who had been missing from the story. The person connected to every hidden piece. Caroline agreed to speak. But she warned detectives that the truth was not what they expected. She said the Harper family disappearance was not a crime committed against them. It was a tragedy created by desperation. According to Caroline, Thomas and Elaine were planning to expose the operation. But they also discovered something that terrified them. Their own son, Michael Harper, had unknowingly become involved. At 16 years old, Michael had discovered documents from his father's investigation. He did not understand what they meant. He did not know how dangerous they were. But someone else noticed. Someone used Michael to find out what Thomas knew. And that person was threatening the family. Caroline claimed Thomas and Elaine decided to disappear because they believed staying would put their children in greater danger. They planned to leave Blackwood County. Start over. Create new identities. But before they could escape, the plan was discovered. The investigators asked the question that mattered most. Did the Harper family survive? Caroline looked down. She hesitated. Then she answered. Yes. The room froze. After 30 years of believing the Harper family was gone, investigators heard the one word they had never expected. Yes. Caroline claimed Thomas, Elaine, Michael, and Sophie were alive. But they had never been found because they wanted to remain hidden. They had spent 3 decades living under new names. Away from Blackwood County. Away from the people who wanted them silent. But if that was true, another question remained. Why did Daniel Cross believe they were victims? Why did investigators find their belongings hidden? Why did so many people involved lie? Caroline's answer revealed the final mystery. She said the Harper family did escape. But someone followed them. Someone who refused to let the past disappear. And 30 years later, that person was still searching. The investigators now had a new mission. Find the Harper family. Not as victims. Not as missing persons. But as witnesses. Because somewhere in the world, people carried the final answers to one of the greatest cold case mysteries in Blackwood County history. And for the first time in 30 years, investigators had a name, a location, and a reason to believe the impossible. The Harper family might still be alive. The possibility that the Harper family could still be alive changed everything. For 30 years, Blackwood County lived with the belief that 4 people had disappeared into a mystery that would never be solved. Their faces remained on old missing posters. Their names remained attached to one of the county's darkest chapters. People held candlelight vigils. Families remembered birthdays that were never celebrated. Anniversaries that brought the same painful question. What happened to the Harpers? But now investigators faced a possibility that seemed impossible. They were not searching for the remains of a family lost decades ago. They were searching for 4 people who may have been living somewhere under new identities. Somewhere hidden in plain sight. The information from Caroline Reed sent investigators across state lines. The first clue came from financial records. According to Caroline, Thomas and Elaine had prepared for a complete disappearance. They needed money, documents, new identities, a way to survive without being found. Investigators reviewed every transaction connected to the Harper family after November 1994. For years, the search had focused on what stopped. Bank accounts, property records, employment history. But now detectives looked for something else. Signs that someone had continued living. And they found something. A small transfer. A payment made 6 months after the disappearance. The account belonged to a person investigators had never connected to the case. A man named Daniel Hayes. At first, the name meant nothing. But when detectives examined the records, they discovered a shocking detail. Daniel Hayes had the same date of birth as Thomas Harper. The same height, the same medical history, and a photograph that made investigators stop. The face was older. The hair was different. But the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Daniel Hayes appeared to be Thomas Harper, the missing father, the man who vanished 30 years earlier. Investigators immediately began tracking his last known location. They discovered that Daniel Hayes lived quietly in a small coastal town hundreds of miles away. He worked as a repair technician. He kept no social media accounts. He rarely spoke about his past. And according to neighbors, he was known as a private but kind man. A man who never talked about where he came from. The investigators traveled there. But they did not rush. After 30 years of mistakes, assumptions, and hidden truths, they understood the importance of caution. They watched. They gathered information. They confirmed details. Then they approached the house. The moment the door opened, everyone knew. The man standing there was older. His face carried decades of life. But the eyes were the same. The investigators introduced themselves. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the man looked at them and said something that shocked everyone. I wondered how long it would take. Thomas Harper was alive. The impossible had happened. The missing father from Blackwood County had been found. But the reunion was not what anyone expected. There was no celebration. No relief. Only sadness. Because Thomas immediately understood why they had come. He knew the past had finally caught up with him. Investigators asked the question the world had waited 30 years to hear. What happened on November 18, 1994? Thomas invited them inside. And for the first time, he told the full story. He explained that he and Elaine discovered the criminal operation connected to Victor Hale. They also discovered something worse. The people protecting the operation were not limited to criminals. They were people with authority. People who could control information. People who could make evidence disappear. Thomas said they realized they could not trust the system. So they created a plan. A disappearance. They would leave before anyone could stop them. They would abandon their old lives. Not because they wanted to. Because they believed it was the only way to protect their children. But the plan failed. Because someone betrayed them. Thomas confirmed what investigators had suspected. Marissa Cole gave their location to Victor Hale. But he revealed another detail. Marissa did not know everything. She thought she was helping create a deal. She believed Thomas and Elaine would simply be forced to hand over the evidence. She did not know how far things would go. Thomas explained that when Victor Hale and Richard Voss confronted them, the situation became dangerous. But then something unexpected happened. Richard Voss changed his mind. According to Thomas, Voss realized the damage he had helped create. He secretly allowed the family to escape. But he needed everyone to believe they were gone. That was why he helped create the false trail. That was why evidence was buried. That was why the investigation became impossible. Thomas said Voss was not innocent. He had made terrible choices. But near the end of his life, he wanted the truth revealed. Investigators asked about Elaine and the children. Thomas became quiet. Then he smiled slightly. He said they were alive. Elaine was living under a new name. Michael had become an engineer. Sophie was a teacher. They had built lives far away from Blackwood County. But they never forgot what happened. They never forgot the people who protected them. And they never forgot the people who tried to destroy them. The investigators contacted Elaine. The moment she answered the phone, there was no doubt. The Harper family story was finally complete. But there was still one person missing. Richard Voss. The man whose actions created years of pain. The man who protected a secret. The man who carried the guilt until his death. Thomas explained that Voss had spent the final years of his life trying to correct what he had done. The recording. The documents. The hidden clues. Everything was part of his attempt to reveal the truth, without putting the Harper family in danger. But investigators still needed answers about the crimes committed. Because even if the Harper family survived, people had still committed illegal acts. Evidence had been destroyed. A cover-up had happened. And the question remained. Would anyone ever face justice? The answer came from the final documents recovered from Richard Voss's estate. Inside was a complete record of the operation. Names. Dates. Financial transactions. Proof. Enough to reopen every part of the case. Victor Hale was already dead. Richard Voss was already dead. But others involved were still alive. And after 30 years of silence, they finally had to answer. The Harper family disappearance had been solved. But the investigation was not over. Because finding the truth was only the beginning. The next question was whether justice could finally reach the people who had spent 3 decades believing they had escaped it. 30 years after the Harper family disappeared, Blackwood County finally had the answer it had been waiting for. The mystery that had haunted generations was no longer a mystery. The family everyone believed was lost had survived. The unanswered questions had names. The hidden evidence had a story. and the silence that lasted 3 decades had finally been broken. But solving a cold case does not erase the damage it leaves behind. For the people of Blackwood County, the truth brought relief. But it also brought pain. Because every answer revealed another reminder of what had been taken away. 30 years of birthdays missed. 30 years of empty chairs. 30 years of wondering whether a family they loved was alive or gone forever. The Harper case had never been only about finding 4 missing people. It was about understanding how an entire community could be trapped inside a lie. The investigation following Thomas Harper's return became one of the largest reopened cases in county history. With the documents recovered from Richard Voss's estate, investigators finally had the evidence they needed. The criminal operation connected to Victor Hale was exposed. The financial records, the illegal vehicle transfers, the hidden payments, the names of people who helped maintain the system of fear. Everything Thomas and Elaine had spent years collecting was finally brought into the light. Several individuals connected to the operation faced legal consequences. Some had already passed away. Others were too old to stand trial. But for those who remained, the truth that had been buried for decades became impossible to escape. The case that once represented failure became a reminder that evidence can survive. Sometimes hidden, sometimes forgotten, but waiting. The most surprising part of the investigation was not discovering that the Harper family survived. It was discovering how close the truth had been all along. Richard Voss had known. Marissa Cole had known. Ethan Cole had known. Multiple people carried pieces of the story. But each person held on to their own version of the truth. Fear, guilt, regret, self-preservation. Those emotions protected the secret for 30 years. Until the weight became too heavy to carry. Daniel Cross, whose confession reopened the case, became one of the most complicated figures in the investigation. For years, many people questioned why he waited so long. Why did he stay silent? Why did he allow the Harper family to remain missing? Daniel admitted there was no excuse. He said fear controlled him. He believed speaking out would destroy his own life. But he also admitted that silence had a cost. A cost paid by everyone who spent years searching for answers. He later apologized publicly to the Harper family. Thomas accepted the apology. But he said something that became one of the most remembered statements from the case. The truth matters. But so does what people do while they are hiding from it. Those words captured the entire Harper mystery. Because the case was never only about one night. It was about every decision that followed. Every person who chose silence. Every person who looked away. Every person who believed the truth could remain buried forever. Elaine Harper eventually returned to Blackwood County. Not permanently. Just once. She visited the old family home. The house where everything changed. The place where she and Thomas made the impossible decision to disappear. Standing there decades later, she said the hardest part was not remembering what happened. It was seeing how much time had passed. The trees were different. The roads were different. The people were older. The world had continued moving, while she and her family lived with the weight of the secret. Michael and Sophie also returned. As adults, they finally saw the place they remembered only from childhood. For Sophie, the visit was emotional. She remembered very little from the night they disappeared. Only fragments. Her mother telling her to stay quiet. Her father promising everything would be okay. The feeling of being afraid without understanding why. But she also remembered something else. Her parents protecting them. And that became the final truth of the Harper family story. They were not a family destroyed by the mystery. They were a family that survived it. Years later, the Harper case became studied by investigators across the country. Not because of the disappearance itself, but because of the lessons hidden inside it. The importance of preserving evidence. The danger of assumptions. The damage caused when people with authority misuse trust. And the reality that some cold cases are not impossible to solve. They are simply waiting for the right person to speak. The old Harper farmhouse eventually became something else. Not a crime scene. Not a symbol of fear. A reminder. A reminder of the night a family vanished. A reminder of the years people searched. And a reminder that even the deepest secrets can eventually rise to the surface. 30 years later, the final headline changed. The Harper family cold case was no longer unsolved. The missing family had been found. The truth had finally arrived. But for the people of Blackwood County, one question remained forever. How many other secrets are still waiting in the shadows? How many cold cases still hold answers buried beneath years of silence? Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are not hidden because nobody is looking. They are hidden because someone somewhere is still hoping nobody finds them. And in Blackwood County, the Harper name will never be remembered as just another cold case. It will be remembered as the story of a family that disappeared, a secret that survived, and a truth that refused to stay buried. The Harper family believed the hardest part was over. After 30 years of hiding, after decades of unanswered questions, after watching their names become a symbol of one of Blackwood County's greatest mysteries, they finally thought they could close the door on the past. But some doors never truly close. Because when a secret survives for 3 decades, it leaves behind more than memories. It leaves behind consequences. Months after the Harper family was found, investigators discovered one final piece of evidence hidden inside the old records of the case. A file that had never been opened. A file that had been marked incomplete in 1994. A file that carried the name of someone nobody expected. Thomas Harper. The discovery shocked investigators. Because Thomas had already told them his story. He had explained the disappearance. He had revealed the people involved. He had helped expose the operation that destroyed his family's life. So why was there another hidden file? And what could it possibly reveal? The answer was found inside a collection of handwritten notes. Notes Thomas had created before his disappearance. But these notes were different from the ones investigators had already discovered. They were not about Victor Hale. They were not about Richard Voss. They were not about the criminal network. They were about the night after the Harper family escaped. The night that nobody knew about. According to Thomas's notes, their disappearance was supposed to be temporary. A few months. Maybe a year. Just enough time for the danger to disappear. Just enough time for the people hunting them to lose interest. But Thomas discovered something unexpected. Someone was still searching. Even after Victor Hale died. Even after Richard Voss disappeared from public life. Someone continued looking for the Harper family. Someone who knew they were alive. The investigators immediately reopened the final part of the case. Who had been searching for the Harpers?